Let's discuss the strikes on Russia's strategic targets with well-known military analyst Roman Svetin.
We've been given permission to strike with ballistic cluster and long-range missiles on Russian territory. Well, that's it. All restrictions on targeting the Russian economy have been lifted. It's a total mess over there. It's burning so badly, damn, God forbid the glow is like after a nuclear explosion. And now Europe is about to join in. They'll supply a large enough number of long-range strike systems to destroy that economy. So colleagues, let me ask you, are you already surrogates or are you not? Are you being foolish or is there some other explanation for your actions? What do you honestly think this will lead to in the end? I am genuinely curious about your reasoning and would like to understand what you believe the outcome of this behavior will be. To the dissolution of the Russian Federation. That's the only plan being carried out. Looks like they've occupied Rubliovka. Rubliovka has occupied Moscow, and Moscow has occupied the rest of Russia. The metropolis needs to be shut down because all the other Russian republics, you could say Moscow's slaves or Moscow's colonies, as the metropolis, they'll just clap their hands if we take it out. It hit right near that globe. He just fired it off somewhere over there. That is the missile. Crazy bastard. That's why we need to focus on this. The main plan, if we're talking about a peaceful one, a peaceful plan for Europe, for Ukraine, is the dissolution of the Russian Federation. One point of a peace plan is the dissolution of the Russian Federation. So let's focus on that. It's easy to work on this by destroying the Russian economy. That's exactly what our defense forces are doing now with the support of our partners. Because now our partners, even the Americans, have allowed us to strike Russian territory with ballistic cluster and long-range missiles. So that's it. All restrictions on targeting the Russian economy have been lifted. And now Europe will join in, providing a significant number of long-range strike systems to destroy that economy. What will this lead to? To the dissolution of the Russian Federation. They fucked up the substation, damn it. More are still coming in. The explosion, which is about to happen, hasn't even started shooting bodies into the air yet, and everything is still eerily calm at this moment.
Already, again.
Both.
Oh, the season. Boom! Not until the hour. He sent the black guide to the stove.
I hear it.
Shelling! What exactly does that mean? What is shelling, really? Can you explain what it is?
I'll take it away. Huh? The jammers are trying to knock down the stripes.
Yeah? There, something's flying, about to go boom. That's it. Just like that. Just like that. It's the 6th time now. Already in another place.
Deep State reports that the Russian army has made significant advances in Pokrovsk, as well as progress near Vladimirovka, which is north of Mirnograd, and in Stepnogorsk, which is in the Zaporizhzhia direction. At the same time, in the area of Kupansk, which Russia claims to have captured, no advance has been recorded. Roman Egorovich, let's start from the beginning. Pokrovsky direction, please. The floor is yours.
This is our main problem right now, which we also need to fight against. I mean, the lack of troop density on the southeastern front. In order to increase density, especially with motivated and qualified personnel, 2 tasks need to be accomplished. The first is to bring officers from the strategic reserve into government. We've already talked about this. Bring them into the executive branch so they can give the order to form up all the security forces. That is all law enforcement personnel. In other words, the armed forces of Ukraine will definitely be put on a rotational basis. About 30% of the entire law enforcement and civil service system of Ukraine. 30% will go to the military, and the remaining 2/3 will prepare to join the military every 6 months. So this process needs to be set in motion. And that's when we'll end up with roughly 4 groups. That is a third of law enforcement civil servants and a quarter of the total personnel of the armed forces of Ukraine would rotate to the front every 6 months to carry out the combat mission of preserving sovereignty and restoring the territorial integrity of our state. This could set this cycle in motion. Only military personnel who know how to do this, who have been trained in academies, how to do this as part of the executive branch, carrying out certain government administration tasks under the pressure of an external enemy. So this mechanism exists. And what needs to be done, I've already explained 1 billion times in the simplest terms. But once again, only officers, people with basic military education can do this. Right now in Pokrovsk, because there still isn't enough, still insufficient density, Russia is trying to push us out of the Pokrovsk-Mirnograd agglomeration completely, including pushing us off the heights. This is very dangerous for us. Why? Because if we leave the heights of Pokrovsk, Pokrovsk is currently a gray zone, and Pokrovsky, Mirnograd, you could say, are gray zones under dual control, mainly by long-range strike systems. There are some small tactical groups that are infiltrating the urban area from both sides, this so-called interstrip zone. But as for Pokrovsky, Mirnograd itself as a defensive line, we are holding it. The Russians are trying to push us out, but we are holding it, especially the heights, for example, the citadel in Pokrovsk. The situation there is quite good. We are holding it. The same goes for Krasnoarmeyskaya West. That's the Pokrovsk Mine Administration, Pokrovsk West. Those are also heights we are holding. Certain measures are currently being taken from Dobropilya to push the Russians out. Next, the goal is to cut off the northern claw. So there is positive momentum there, at least from the perspective of our operational tactical actions. In other words, the situation is more or less stabilized, at least for now. But in order to fully reinforce it, the troops need to be supplied with personnel from law enforcement agencies, security structures, or at least servicemen from these security forces. The issue will be resolved. So Pokrovsk right now, I would say, is not even exactly a pressure point if you consider the other directions as well.
Roman Egorovich, while everyone is discussing Trump's peace plan, Putin continues to play at war. The Kremlin's geostrategist has decided to show that he has absolutely no interest in any ways to stop the war. Once again, Putin dressed up in camouflage and staged a visit to one of the command posts of the West Group. Moreover, the posters on the walls of this command post turned out to be cobbled together from inserts from computer games, as journalists discovered. In these decorations reminiscent of a provincial community center, the war criminal once again, like a parrot, declares that the goals of the special military operation must be achieved. And in response, Chief of the General Staff Gerasimov solemnly boasts that the Russian army has supposedly captured Kupiansk. This is categorically denied by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine and even by pro-Russian bloggers. Roman Egorovich, let's discuss this. But what is the situation in Kupiansk? This is very important.
This is an information psychological special operation involving the top officials of the state. What are they trying to show? Full Russian control over Kupiansk would cut off the main logistical chain leading to the left bank, to our Kupiansk-Uzlovoy garrison. We have a fairly strong group there. The Russians are unable to break through it. They are trying to destroy Kupiansk-Uzlovoy, much like they recently destroyed Kupiansk itself with artillery. But by completely destroying Kupiansk-Uzlovoy, they lose it as a future station. So what is Kupiansk-Uzlovoy? It's located south of Kupiansk on the left bank of the Oskol River. It's a major sorting station from which several railway lines branch out to Luhansk, Donetsk, and Kharkiv regions. Trains also come in from Valuiki, another military hub. That's why they want to capture Kupiansk-Uzlovoy. Preferably not damaged, or at least not heavily damaged, because right now they've basically leveled both KAB and Kupiansk to the ground. But for now, they're sparing Kupiansk-Uzlovoy. However, in order to force our troops to withdraw from the left bank on their own, they're running a major information psychological operation, which Gerasimovs and Putins are spreading around, claiming that they've taken Kupiansk and that our garrison on the left bank is supposedly in some kind of semi-encirclement pressed up against the Oskol. But in reality, it's the Russians who have the problem there. We actually hold the better positions, good positions. That area is a floodplain, after all, either the bank or the left bank of the Oskol, and there are very few tank-accessible routes. Almost everything is mined, and there are solid fortifications covering Kupiansk-Uzlovoy. The Russians have already broken their teeth there so many times, it's impossible to count. although our general staff does keep count, reporting over 1,000 Russian casualties along the entire front line every day. That's why it's so important for them to create panic on the left bank. And now they're trying to stir up that panic through an information psychological special operation claiming that the main logistics chain through Kupiansk has been cut. But it hasn't been cut. The Kupiansk logistics are still holding, especially since there's still a lot. After all, the Oskol River is there now. They released water from the Oskol water reservoir. Basically, it's not a problem to cross it. So as a water barrier, it poses absolutely no issue at the moment, specifically there at the Kupiansk junction. And Kupiansk is under the control of the Ukrainian army, at least from the perspective of FPV drones. That is, some of our units have already taken up quite good positions there. Units from the unmanned systems forces, and they report that they control the situation to a considerable depth, 15 to 20 kilometers, and sometimes they even fly further, up to 50 kilometers, so they can carry out these tasks. That's why the Russians have a problem there, and they can't do anything about it. Now they're making noise together with Putin, and Gerasimov is spinning a tale about some kind of encirclement in that direction. But in reality, it's they who are encircled. There's absolutely no encirclement on our side anywhere. Well, you would be shining that. Right now, we're unraveling them. We're taking them apart near Dobropilia, finishing off the pockets of these encirclements, the fire traps that the Russian army fell into when they made a move on Dobropilia. In fact, they've already removed the commander of the army that rushed toward Dobropilia. The most interesting part is that they pinned all the blame, so to speak, on him, even though it was Putin who gave the order for this military fiasco. That's why the military hate politicians.
Roman Nikolaevich, what's the situation in the Gulipole direction? The Southern Defense Forces report that the situation in the Gulipole direction is quite tense, but the armed forces of Ukraine are not encircled by the Russians. Communication with the Ukrainian military is maintained, logistics are well organized, and the evacuation of the wounded is underway. What is the situation there? This is also a very important section of the front because we see that in the Zaporizhzhia region, Russia is trying to attack, and unfortunately, a number of settlements have been occupied over the past month. The floor is yours.
There is no encirclement anywhere along the entire front, because these stories about encirclement are just that, fairy tales to be left for Gerasimov and Putin to enjoy together. But it is precisely in the Gulipole direction that things are the most difficult. It's not even as tough in Pokrovsk or in the same Kutatsk. It's specifically in the Gulipole direction. Why is it so difficult? We had to withdraw. Again, because of the insufficient density of troops in this direction. We've said it a billion times. Put the security forces into action, reinforce the Eastern Front with enough motivated and competent fighters. Right now, only the security forces can do it. There are no other options. We have 500,000 of them. And just in the Ministry of Internal Affairs, there are 300,000. There is definitely the capability to put 100,000 into action and reinforce the Southeast Front. Until that's done, we'll just keep retreating. That's what it comes down to. Why isn't there an encirclement? We're pulling back. As soon as there's a serious risk of encirclement, operational level commanders make the decision to withdraw. Why are the Russians advancing rather quickly? It's debatable, especially in the Gulipole area. It's not Gulipole, but the Zaporizhzhia direction. They've reached the bypass road and are trying to get to the Donetsk-Zaporizhzhia road near Pokrovsky, which is north of Gulipole. For some reason, they've started a sort of semi-encirclement of Gulipole itself. But the situation is extremely difficult. We can't afford to abandon Gulipole. If we abandon Gulipole, the Russians could essentially collapse the front, get into the rear, including Orikhiv, and we'd have to withdraw from there, and they'd approach Zaporizhzhia. They would devastate Zaporizhzhia with army artillery. In any case, we can't allow that. Right now, Gulipole is like the keystone of the front, and it absolutely must be held. So, well, we'll see how our general staff handles this situation, of course, because additional forces and resources need to be urgently redirected there. And to solve the strategic problem, we need to bring law enforcement into action. In
the US, they expect that Zelensky will sign the agreement. A peace plan. Witkova and Kirill Dmitriev by Thanksgiving, November 27th. Then the agreement will be presented in Moscow and the process will be completed by early December, according to the Financial Times. Elections could take place 100 days after the signing of the peace treaty and the ceasefire. Right now, Zelensky is preparing a plan to get out of the crisis and understands that quick decisions are needed. Let's discuss the peace negotiations. The plan of Witkova and Kirill Dmitriev, a corruption scandal involving the well-known military analyst Roman Svetan. Roman Igorovich, welcome.
Thank you. I wish everyone good health.
Roman Grigorievich, what do you think of the peace plan proposed by Witkoff, Kirill Dmitriev, and Trump regarding Ukraine and the deadline that Trump has set for Zelensky?
It's all a matter of time when all these plans, yet another 649th plan, will come about. Dasha, how many times have we already discussed these plans with you? Plans that are mostly generated by people, but who are far removed from the real issues. So this plan, the one everyone is running around with now, which appeared out of nowhere, as they say, they're just trying to use it to overshadow Mindijgat. So all the participants in this process, Alibaba and these 40 Zuckerbergs, Israeli bandits, their asses are really on fire right now. Why? Because after electricity, that is after nuclear energy, the next corruption scandal is in the Ministry of Defense. And there's corruption there, plus they haven't even saved what they stole from Energoatom. They understand this perfectly well, which is why all the participants in the process mostly have Israeli passports in their pockets. We all know that all these Kushners, Vitkovs, Mendicis, Tsulukermans, and so on, and those who are still left in Ukraine in power or who have been close to power, they need to divert this flow of serious problems related to corruption. Let me repeat once again, the next step is corruption in the Ministry of Defense. And it's not just Ukrainian money. American and European money also went into the Ministry of Defense. Both the G7 and G20, everyone understands perfectly well that the money was foreign. Naturally, it was under a certain level of control in order to counteract in the media this extremely serious negative issue. But what they pulled out was from a deep basement, to put it mildly. I'll say it not in military terms, because in military terms I'd put it differently. They pulled out these several dozen points that absolutely do not fit together. There's no point in going through all 28 points if the first point is the sovereignty of Ukraine, the confirmation of Ukraine's sovereignty. And the remaining 27 points contradict the sovereignty of Ukraine. That's all there is to it. In other words, it's just some crumpled nonsense that now gives the participants in the process a chance to fight over. It's like back in the day. Remember Don Quixote and Sancho Panza? Guess who is Don Quixote and who is Sancho Panza? I'll give you 2 tries. They were fighting windmills. So they invented a dragon for themselves, a windmill as a dragon, and fought against it. And they wanted to drag everyone in to show what great dragon slayers they are. They defeated the windmill. So then what's the point of showing all this? So that later they could grab Dulcinea del Toboso by her private parts with gusto. What else would it be for? So here, it's exactly the same picture. They're trying to cover up a very serious Ukrainian problem with Mingichai, a very serious one. External control, Israeli citizens who are running Ukraine, or at least trying to manage the financial flows there, making some decisions. That's external control. That's a loss of sovereignty. A complete lack of work from our intelligence services. The main intelligence directorate, the security service, the foreign intelligence service, the State Bureau of Investigation, NABU, and all the other agencies. There are a ton of them, but there's no use at all. They missed the activities of Mindich, a citizen from the Israeli tycoon crowd, who was directly siphoning money from every Ukrainian. What an interesting scheme it was. Mindich and company. And these 40 thieves, together with Alibaba and, of course, the Israelis, got into every Ukrainian's pocket. First, he raised the prices for electricity. We paid for this electricity at a price 2 or even 3 times higher than the cost of nuclear power generation. That is, we paid 3 to 4 times the price for various items, and industry was paying as much as 10 cents. And they got into every Ukrainian's pocket. They stole this money and ran off to Israel with it. To put it bluntly, they brought the loot to Netanyahu's stash. Well, that's how it looks now. Naturally, all this Israeli riffraff is now trying to cover up the whole thing somehow, telling fairy tales about how someone is supposedly going to betray us and force us, say, into capitulation. Once again, fighting windmills. Once again, Sancho Panza and Don Quixote. Something like that. How should Ukraine approach this? Understanding where this all comes from, we must definitely clamp down on these corrupt officials, force our anti-corruption agencies to root out everyone and anyone. Make counterintelligence start working on these 40 as well. The supermen are still left in Ukraine, or I would have stayed, And these 40 bandits, these supermen are still here. They need to be pulled out. They need to be arrested. They need to be deported. If it comes to that, if the question is posed that way, when it becomes clear that there is direct external Israeli control here, that's the minimum. And then the whole gang will try to push us toward capitulation. Capitulation through some contrived plan, which I've already talked about. That is, the points of this plan are completely inconsistent with each other. First, we support Ukraine's sovereignty, and then give up Crimea, Donbas to Russia. Something like that, and let's lift the sanctions from it. Where did this even come from? This is the main basis of these so-called points. These are the Istanbul agreements that a couple of well-known Israelis brought to us in 2022 in Istanbul. Who? Abramovich and Bennett, the Prime Minister of Israel. So this sweet pair was pushing exactly these same points. Crimea and Donbas handed over to Russia, forgotten, and so on and so forth. Plus with Donbas in its entirety, just like now, the exact same picture. The Russians also drew in land corridors, meaning they attached something else here, most likely somewhere else as well. A few billion in greenbacks were handed over to someone, so they attached it, as they say. That's why this is exactly how we should treat it. At this point, we shouldn't pay any attention to this topic at all. We need to go back and bring to the surface the issues specifically related to corruption among these 40 bandits led by Alibaba, and then continue working on this issue. In other words, put pressure on them, squeeze them out, and squeeze out both the executive branch and together with the executive branch, as we've done repeatedly before. The thing is, Mindich Gate is, so to speak, one of those so-called signals for us. We've talked so many times about the need to completely relaunch the executive branch, including Alibaba and the 40 thieves, this entire chancellery, and of course the cabinet of ministers. All these Shmaihal people should have been sent to the front a long time ago, and bring the military into the cabinet of ministers, into the executive branch. Why do I say the military? Few people know about this, and the politicians who jump straight from the stage into positions of power have no idea about it at all. They don't have a clue about governance. There is such a concept as OSR, an officer of the strategic reserve of the cabinet of ministers. After graduating from the General Staff Academy, every officer who completes the program, since they all undergo training there, receives instruction in state governance. During combat operations, during wartime, they undergo special training, colonels, generals, and that's why they fall into the category of OSR, officers of the strategic reserve of the cabinet of ministers, who are supposed to be brought into the executive branch immediately after the start of an external invasion, or maybe even before that. So what needs to be done is we need to drive the executive branch out of there, remove the civilians, bring in the OSR, the officers of the strategic reserve. We have thousands of strategic reserve officers who have been trained in state governance under difficult conditions. They know how to run the state. Not these weirdos, all this Israeli riffraff, these green oddballs, but specifically colonels and generals who know how to steer the situation right now. That's what needs to be done right now. Right now, there are good initiatives in the Verkhovna Rada to express no confidence in the cabinet of ministers, dismiss them, and within 24 hours, bring the strategic reserve officers into the cabinet of ministers and the executive branch, including the same chancellery. Because Alibaba and his 40 Zuckerbergs or Mindiches have no business being there, since this is the Ukrainian state. In the end, people with Israeli passports should not be sitting there. Roman Yegorovich, what?
They're writing about this peace plan at Itkovsk. There is a department, and already all the reputable Western media have written about the territorial issues. Ukraine must withdraw its troops from part of the Donetsk region that it currently controls. This territory will become a neutral, demilitarized buffer zone, internationally recognized as Russian territory, but there will be no Russian troops stationed there. Next, Crimea, as well as the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, will be de facto recognized as Russian, including by the United States. Next, in the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions, the front line will be frozen. Russia will relinquish control over territories it holds outside of these 5 regions. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant will be put into operation under IAEA supervision. Electricity will be supplied equally, 50-50 to both Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine and Russia will commit not to change the agreements by force. Russia will legally enshrine a policy of non-aggression towards Ukraine and Europe. Let's discuss these details of the Witkov plan, which, as I understand it, comes from the Kremlin and Kirill Dmitriev.
Let's take another look at these plans from above, from the side, and from the perspective of the Criminal Code of Ukraine. The thing is, analyzing these plans, providing informational support, or making appeals of any kind, all of this falls under Article 110 of the Criminal Code of the Republic of Ukraine. We have a very serious article like that. These are calls for the loss of our sovereignty and territorial integrity appeals. And actions, if, God forbid, any official signs something or makes any progress on this case at all, fall under Article 111 of the Criminal Code, which is already high treason. And there, especially under Part 3, the penalty is up to life imprisonment with full confiscation. That's why there's no point in even discussing all this. I'll go further. It's not just about discussing it. This is dangerous from the perspective of prosecution under the legal framework of the Ukrainian Constitution and the Ukrainian Criminal Code. Let's not even discuss all this nonsense at all, because it directly involves the loss of sovereignty, defense capability, and territorial integrity of our state. Article 110, and for actions, Article 111. Just so you know, and journalists should be informed of this as well. So there's no need to throw this kind of talk into the information space, and no one is going to rock the boat in this situation, and those who do will leave. They know where to go: suitcase, train station, IDF, or suitcase, train station, Russia. But remember, Yanukovych raised the same questions that year. Where is Yanukovych now? Crumbling bread at a barbecue in the Moscow suburbs. These people will be crumbling bread too, along with those who ran away. Medvedchuk showed where he is, somewhere near the Wailing Wall. So where did they run off to with their Israeli passports? There's no point in discussing all this. None of this is going to happen. It's pure science fiction. And to talk just to cover up the real corruption within our government, there's no point, because after all, we're not working for corruption. On the contrary, we should be rooting out corruption with a red-hot iron. And during hostilities, during wartime, corrupt officials should either be put up against the wall. Of course, the death penalty for corruption needs to be introduced and equated with looting. This is clearly just for who is Amenich. He's a looter, a blatant looter. And all those 40 at Kermin's father, together with Alibaba, they're looters who, during the war, are simply stealing the money that our partners give us, money meant to help us fight the Russians and restore the sovereignty of our territories. That's why looters should either be put up against the wall. And if they have Ukrainian passports, let's say some of them do, then they should be sent to a penal battalion. Everyone involved in all these processes, demoted to the penal battalion. If there are any officers among them, by the way, even from counterintelligence or intelligence, who for some reason haven't fulfilled their main task, they failed to prevent external control from being imposed on our state, they should be demoted to the rank of private. Since we don't have an execution article yet, demote them to privates, send them to a penal battalion, and put them on the front lines, say in Gulipole or, for example, in Pokrovsk. Let them wash away their guilt with blood. How else? Otherwise, it would be execution, but for now, that mechanism hasn't been put in place. Therefore, once again, there's no point in going through all the points of this so-called Trump capitulation plan, except for the first one, the first point about maintaining sovereignty. But even that, there's no point in discussing it for us. It's already enshrined in our constitution. We don't need to reaffirm our sovereignty, nor does anyone else need to reaffirm it for us. Why? It's enshrined in our constitution. It's affirmed by the Charter of the United Nations, which includes almost 200 countries. So why does it need to be reaffirmed? It's already confirmed by default. So this whole plan, once again, I repeat, it's just, this is that dragon, that windmill, that all these Sancho Panzas, all these Don Quixotes, all these Alibabas, and all these 40 thieves of Medici are now forcing us to fight. Well, that's more or less how I see it all.
Friends, please like this video and write a few kind words in support of Ukraine in the comments. Roman Lebushi and I always discuss current military and political topics. It's been a tough week, and it's very important that we speak honestly about the situation, both at the front and in politics. The well-known military analyst Roman Svetlan. Roman Lvovich, thank you, and as always, see you next time.
Goodbye.